Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and in today's video let's have a look at how to use the Winctrl, formerly WinWing, Airbus throttle with basically any other airplane than an Airbus in the simulator. So many of you are going to face one problem when trying to use this device with like any plane. I'm using the PMDG 737 here for this video, but this will apply to pretty much most aircraft. So when you have your physical hardware unit in idle, the airplane itself is not going to give you idle thrust. Now, this is because of the way the axis is designed in the Winctrl unit. See, the axis by default covers the reverse area of the thrust levers as well. But Winctrl has actually put quite a bit of thought into the design and you're able to circumvent that. If we open up SimApp Pro, we will find the following for our thrust lever. You can see this is the default configuration, and you can see RY and RX are your thrust lever axis. By default, they are configured so that when the lever is in the hardware idle position, the throttle axis still gives you a bit of an output. But you can change this on the side over here. And if you go, for example, to double stroke 4 axle over here, then it changes your axis inputs. And now the hardware axis actually becomes 0 at the hardware's idle position. So now when I'm moving the lever, you can see it just goes down into the 0 position, and that's it. And if we now have a look at what this looks like inside our simulator, you can see that we are straight away getting to the idle position. So that's the very easy way, but obviously we still want to use some of the functions of the unit, namely the reversers. So how can we do that? Now, if we do once again open up our SimApp Pro, you will see that we have gotten an additional axis in there now, which is the Y-axis and the X-axis. And basically, when you move your thrust levers into the reverser, you are now moving this axis, which kind of can be used just like a normal reverser axis in the sim. Now, at this point in time, Microsoft Flight Simulator doesn't really handle the reversers very well if assigned to an axis, so I would recommend to do it a little bit different. Now, what you have already seen when I've moved my axis is that different buttons are getting pressed on the hardware unit. So by now, being in the idle detent, we get the buttons number 15 and the button number 21 that are constantly getting pressed. If we move the lever just slightly into the reverse position, you can see that it illuminates the buttons 16, 40, 41 and 22. And if we move it into the full reverse position, we get the buttons 17 and 23 instead of 16 and 22. Now, we can use this to assign the reversers to our simulation. Now, let's have a look into how to do this. So for this, we are going to open up our menu over here, our game controller menu. And now we find our throttle, which we got over here. The WinWing was a minor 32. Now let's scroll down into the power management and the throttle section. And now let's have a look into what we can do over here. Now, don't worry, I am going to make this one a little bit simpler than it actually looks. So let's go ahead and start with a little line of thought. So when our thrust lever is in the idle position, we do not get any of those buttons down here to illuminate. Now we're simply commanding idle thrust. Now, the next step we want is idle reverse. So what are we going to do? Well, when we move our hardware levers into the idle reverse detent, then we can see that the buttons 16 and 22 are illuminating over here, together with the buttons 40 and 41. So we are going to choose any one of those buttons in order to assign a simple throttle decrease event. Now, you can either do this directly up here on the hardware, or on the specific throttle axis, or you can use the general decrease throttle event. And you can see I went with the general event. The reason I'm doing this is because currently Microsoft Flight Simulator does not give us the option to use different events on the assignment. So when we go on the assignment menu here, you can see I have turned off the input repetition. The reason I've turned this off is because when this button, joystick button 41, is pressed, I just want a simple reduce my throttle once command. And this basically transfers me from the idle thrust that I've been commanding with my thrust lever into the very lightest bit of reverse that I can command through the push of a button. Now, the next action we need to take is to go ahead and assign the maximum reverse. Now, in the real world, you basically don't really use anything in between. The 737 has a second detent as well, but in most aircrafts it's either idle reverse or maximum reverse. The stuff in between is not really used. So what we are going to do next is to assign those buttons number 17 and number 23 down here, and those need input repetition on. So if we have a look into that, then this is how I've done it. Since I need input repetition now, I went to the throttle 1 decreased command, which I've assigned to button number 23, and that one is set to input repetition on. So what's happening now when we have a look at this in the simulator, now we're in idle thrust. Now let's actually go into normal idle thrust here. Now I'm going into just past the idle detent, so into the idle reverse command. And now when I'm moving my levers further back into the maximum reverse position, I'm sending that command to decrease the throttle, but this time with an input repetition. And therefore that push of that button on the very bottom of the axis now sends the command to the simulator to decrease the throttle all the way, respectively, give me maximum reverse thrust. Now, we've gotten our engines all the way into reverse. The next step is that we actually need to get them out of the reverse. So let's have a look at how to do that. Now, we basically just have to do the very opposite of what we've already done. So you can see we've got the throttle 1 decrease command assigned to button number 23. And what I'm doing now is to send the throttle 1 idle command on the same button, so on the maximum reverse position of the axis. And this one is not set to input repetition, so have that one off, but this is set to send control on release. So what I'm doing with this is that when I'm taking my hardware levers out of the maximum reverse position, respectively, when I'm releasing button number 23, as we can see down here in SimApp Pro, I'm moving the levers forward and this releases button 23, and that basically commands the simulator to set the throttles back in idle. So we're in maximum reverse, now I move my levers a slight bit forward, and that straight away returns my engines into idle. There is one little problem here that I haven't found a way of solving yet, and that's the fact that it just sends them into forward idle, not into idle reverse, which is what we would normally be doing in the real world. So you go from maximum reverse into idle reverse. When the engines have stabilized there, you close the reversers completely. Now, that is something that I haven't found out how to do yet. However, overall, I think with these tricks, you can use the Winctrl Airbus throttle very nicely with pretty much any aircraft. One more little trick that you should be aware of when we already have a look into SimApp Pro is that little button over here, which is located on the very front of the unit. It's a blue button that's kind of designed not to be seen because obviously it doesn't exist in the real Airbus. And when you move this button over here, what happens is that all your hardware detents are getting removed so that you can smoothly move your axis all the way to the front. it will still illuminate those buttons. So if you want to assign, for example, a toga button to the full position of your thrust lever, for example, to button 18 over here, then you can do that, because it will still recognize the button as getting pushed. However, you will not feel any of the detents anymore, which makes it really nice and smooth to operate the levers. Now, just remember that when you are using this type of assignment, your thrust axis is actually sent to the simulator in a different way than it is when you have it in your standard Airbus configuration. So be sure that when you want to fly an actual Airbus, you switch it back into single stroke double shaft at the top over here, which is nicer to be used with add-ons like the Phoenix, FS Labs or any builds Airbuses. So use the top setting if you're flying an Airbus, or basically if you're flying any add-on that features certain position assignments on the thrust lever axis. For example, the Aerosoft CRJ also has that possibility, but mostly Airbuses like Phoenix, Builds and FS Labs. And if you want to use the unit with any other add-on, then just use the double stroke 4-axle assignment, which then enables you to get an idle position right at the hardware's idle detent. Well, and that's the entire trick behind using the Winctrl Airbus thrust levers with pretty much any airplane that you want to use. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope you found this one interesting. As always, leave your comment underneath the video, like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.